Hello, I'm Tony Pollard from Waterloo Uncovered, and over the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to give you the first of a series of short talks on the work that we've been doing on the battlefield of Waterloo over the past 5 or so years. And being a battlefield archaeologist, that's what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to give you some insight into what the archaeology has told us about the battle. And Waterloo, like many other battles, is mainly told and studied through history books, but archaeology adds a whole new dimension to that understanding of past conflict. And hopefully, by the time we finish these short talks, you'll have some idea of what I'm talking about there. And in the first instance, I'm going to look at Hougoumont. Hougoumont is one of the farms that Wellington used as a strong point in front of his main line at Waterloo. And it's a site that we at Waterloo Uncovered have been very pleased to work on over recent years. It's been our HQ in the field, and it's also been the focus for much of our work up until very recently, when we've started to expand into other areas of the battlefield. So without further ado, what I want to do is, if I can, using this technology, is open up a slideshow, and we will hopefully be able to go through together and look at Hougoumont in a little more detail. And I'll keep myself up in the corner, miniaturized me. That's really all you need of me. And we start out with this very interesting picture. Obviously, we have no photographs from the time, pre-photography in 1815, but we have quite a few drawings and paintings and maps and such like, in addition to all of those written accounts. And here we have a view from the north of the farmstead at Hougoumont. You've got there in the foreground, which I really enjoy, these gigantic sheep, which almost tower above their little shepherd. And to the right, you've got even smaller people, one of whom is pointing at a wall, and we assume that he is a tour guide, with the two people, the man and the woman, stood next to him being visitors. And we know that tourists started to visit the battlefield at Waterloo almost as soon as the gun smoke had cleared. And I've recently done a study of those early visitors, and hopefully you'll be able to read about that very soon. But elsewhere in the picture, over on the far left, we've got the ducat, which is where the doves were kept up at the top there. At the bottom of that little tower is the well. In the middle distance, we've got that building with ruins around it, with a little tower on top of the roof. That's the chapel, and that was attached to the chateau, which was the main house, which was in the middle of this series of buildings. But during the battle, it was burned to the ground, probably thanks to a French howitzer shell lodging in the roof. And you can see the remains of the walls there, which sometime after the battle were almost entirely demolished. There are one or two connected to the chapel, as you will see. And then further back, there's the farmhouse, and on the right, there's one of the barns. So this gives you some idea of what Hougoumont might have looked like after the battle. Just to give you an idea of the battlefield itself, there we are. We're 10 to 15 miles to the southeast of Brussels, and Wellington chose the ground deliberately to protect Brussels from the French advance coming up from the south. And in that inset map, you can see the red outline of the battlefield. It's around about 2.5 miles by 2.5 miles, which is pretty small given the massive number of men that by the end of the day were on the battlefield. And the great thing about Waterloo, and it's something that excited me as an archaeologist from the outset, is the great preservation. It's not covered with industrial estates or housing schemes. It's still open fields. Yes, there has been modern interference, but you still get a very good impression of the battlefield. And that's largely thanks to the preservation laws in Wallonia, which is the state where Waterloo is located in Belgium. This is a privileged view because this is from the top of a monument called the Lion Mound. It's not a view that anybody at the time of the battle would have had, but it's quite useful for us. The white building there you can just see is La Belle Alliance, which is just about the middle of the French position. So if we move along from there, you can see here's a view from the opposite direction of the Lion Mound, and this was built in the 1820s by the Dutch royal household because the King and Queen of Holland's son, the Prince of Orange, was a commander in the Anglo-Allied army under Wellington, and he was wounded in the battle, and they thought, being loving parents, that they'd build a monument to him. So we have this huge cone of earth which surrounds a stone pillar which is buried inside it, and on top of that there's this huge bronze statue of a lion with its front paw on the globe, menacingly looking southwards towards France. It's a very impressive monument. The problem is that all of that soil that they've used to build it was scraped up from the battlefield, from the ridge line on which Wellington was located, and so it's damaged the battlefield, if you like. There's not much we can do about that now. It's part of the legacy of the battle. In fact, even Wellington, when he visited the site some years after the battlefield, once it had been constructed, complained that it had ruined his battlefield. Very interesting that he saw it as his battlefield, but he was the winning general, so maybe. And there you can see this great drawing of the construction process underway with the mounds of earth being thrown up. And we have no idea how much material from the battlefield, the artifacts, the human remains, etc., was lifted up, scraped up from the ground surface to create this rather excessive monument. And here's the first of maps of the battlefield. And what I don't want to do is to give you a blow-by-blow account of the battle. That will come elsewhere. This is just to show you the location of the various sites we're talking about. And here is Hougoumont on the left-hand side there. And then we've got another one of these farms, La Haye-Saint, in the center. And then we've got Papelotte over towards the right. And Wellington's army is located on the ridge behind that to the north. And a lot of those men would have been out of sight of the French. They're in what we know as the dead ground, which is the reverse part of the slope. So Wellington sensibly hid most of his army behind there. It also helped to protect them from French artillery fire. And here we have Napoleon's army in blue, approaching from the south. There's La Belle Alliance, that little white building that you saw in the previous slide. And you can see Napoleon's line is stretched on a smaller ridge. It's almost like a low valley, overlooking the slope upwards to where Wellington's position is. But the first targets for the French were these strong points, which were obviously protecting the main line. And it's thought that it's thought that Napoleon had in mind an attack on Hougoumont, which is on Wellington's right flank, drawing in reinforcements from Wellington's line and therefore weakening other parts, which he could hit with his artillery and then charge through with his infantry and cavalry. It didn't quite work out like that, and by the end of the day, there were far more French engaged at Hougoumont than Allied troops, so it kind of worked in reverse. But what we get at Hougoumont throughout the day of the battle is really a battle within a battle. This massive assault by the French on the farm, and we'll look at how the various elements work together to form a defense. But it's a struggle that lasts most of the day, and the French don't manage to break through. And famously, the Prussians arrive late in the afternoon from the east, from the right-hand side of the slide, and they attack the French on their right flank and in their rear. Very heavy street fighting in this small town called Plancenoit, a village really. And basically that breaks up any chance that Napoleon had of success. But the point at Hougoumont is that his army never managed to break through. La Haye-Saint, which was defended by the King's German Legion fighting with Wellington, that was a different story. Towards late afternoon, the French did take that. They stormed the walls and killed most of the garrison, those that didn't manage to get out, and captured it. And that was largely because they ran out of ammunition. But that didn't happen at Hougoumont. So moving along again, here's a Google Earth map from the modern era, and you can see again just how well the site is preserved. Yes, you've got modern town and a freeway over towards the west, but you can see that Hougoumont is still extant. There's La Belle Alliance. This is the main road up through the middle of the battlefield. There was another road up here along the line of the more modern motorway. So the elements are still there in the battlefield. There's the line mound. You can see the huge size of it there, this circle seen from above. And there is Papelotte over on the western side. Sorry, the eastern side. That's the left flank of Wellington's line. And moving along again, and here we've got another map, and I'm not going to dwell on this, but this does show in grey the Prussians, two corps, the Prussian army, 1st and 4th, coming in and attacking the French in their right flank. And by this time, by kind of mid to late afternoon, by the time they arrive, it really turns the tide against the French. And as far as numbers are concerned, we're looking on the French side at around 77,000 men, slightly more than that. Wellington's army is 73,000, and the Prussians under Blücher is around 49 to 50,000. So Napoleon's plan was to first beat Wellington, slightly outnumbering Wellington's army, and then fighting the Prussians. But the Prussians arrive before Napoleon has managed to finish Wellington. And of course, there's the big debate as to whether the Prussians saved the day or whether Wellington would have beaten Napoleon on his own. But the combined force was far too powerful for Napoleon. And of course, this is where he meets his Waterloo, as they say, and was defeated. But we're not looking at the battle in its entirety. We're focusing on Hougoumont, and here you can see the farm. There again, very few places you can't see it from the battlefield. There is the line mound, but again, we're airborne, but this is thanks to a drone taking this beautiful photograph. I'm really fond of this photo. It shows you so many elements. We've got what remains of the farm complex on the western side of the farm. That's the chapel that you saw in that first drawing. You can see the little tower. This is the south gate running through where the farmhouse is. There were more buildings. The chateau was in here. We'll look at that again. As I said, that was burnt down during the battle. Then we've got this massive walled garden, which at the time in 1815 would have been very ornate with footpaths and walkways and flower beds and such like. To the right of that, which is to the south, there's this strip of ground around 30 meters wide. And it was known after the battle, it became known really more in the modern era. Can't find many accounts of it being called this at the time. It's known as the killing ground. And it's an area that the French, who were assaulting from the south, attacking the farm, had to take. They had to cross that ground to get to grips with the defenders who were in this area behind a wall. And we'll look at that wall. In fact, I'm going to talk about the killing ground in a standalone presentation. So we'll have a lot more detail on that. This is just to give you an idea of where the geography is. And Wellington's line is up, kind of running underneath the Lion Mound and way out along here, along the ridgeway. And there, just towards the right, you can see La Haye-Saint, which is the next of the farms, the next of the strong points. That's the one that the French captured before the end of the day. These three big chestnut trees here are all that remains of a large wood that ran all the way up to the end of the tree line here, to the south of Hougoumont. And it was through this wood that the French first had to make their way in order to attack the farm behind it. And they probably got very little idea of what was behind the wood until they broke through. Unfortunately, only one of these trees is still surviving. The other two were killed by lightning and such like. So they are an amazing survival, but it's unfortunate only one still lives. And there are various famous elements of the battle. One of those iconic moments is the storming of the North Gate at Hougoumont, where the Guards regiments who were defending the Coldstreams and the Scots Guards pushed the gate closed, but only after around 40 French soldiers got into the courtyard, and they were all killed once they got inside. Famously, the story goes that the only one that they let live was the drummer boy. And again, this is an incident that we will look at in a later presentation, but this is a a very famous Victorian image of that event during the battle. And one of the important forms of evidence we have are the maps. And this is from 1777, and this is a map that was known to be in Napoleon's possession. He was using a version of this map, which shows most of Belgium, or Belgium as it was. Belgium didn't become a country until a couple of decades after the battle. But the detail is lovely. You can see over towards the right, just under me, you can see La Haye-Saint, the buildings marked in red, and then the open ground between the two. And then Hougoumont, which is much more complex. You've got the buildings, you've got two courtyards, you've got the walled garden with the fancy footpaths and such like inside. Then next to that, you've got an orchard known as the Great Orchard. And then there's this other area, which is again a kind of landscaped open garden, the Arboretum with trees and footpaths. And then there's the wood to the south of the farm complex. There's the area known as the Killing Ground. And so there is a lot to Hougoumont, which is one of its attractions archaeologically, really, because there are all these different elements that we could look at. And here's a map that postdates the battle. This is by Crown. This is round about September of 1815, and it actually shows part of the battle taking place. You've got the Allied troops marked as red triangles, the French as blue, and you can see the defenders in the wood, and the French attacking from the south, and also there in the orchard. There's the open ground of the Killing Ground, just to the front of the wall of the garden. And this is Siborne's map. Not going to go into this. This dates from the 1840s and is part of Siborne's famous survey of the battlefield, which he did as part of building a huge model of the battle. But we'll move on along from that rapidly. Look at some drawings and paintings. This one from 1816 from the west, and you can see again some of those elements that you saw in the first slide. There's the Tower of the Ducat where the doves are kept. There's the remains of the chateau. This great barn is interesting. You didn't see that on the first drawing. This was entirely demolished, damaged again by fire during the battle, but entirely demolished. And it's one of the areas we've looked at archaeologically. And remember the gate with the French storming through it, the north gate? That's it. Obviously the doors have gone by this time, or at least they appear to from this drawing. 1816. And again, we've got people visiting. There's a soldier here, possibly being told about the battle by a local farmer. But again, a great interest almost immediately. This is the year after the battle, in the epic events that took place here with the final defeat of Napoleon. Here's another drawing. It's a little blurred in this slide, but again gives you the impression. There is the north gate. There's the Ducat. There's the chapel. This is much more like the first drawing you saw. The farmhouse behind, and again some idea of the woods towards the south. And I like this because you see the bit of the garden wall here. It's been shattered by shell, jagged there with loopholes, which we'll come to. So early photographs, 1900. This is the chapel, looking pretty much like it does today, actually. Survived the fire that burnt down the house. You can see some of the remains to the left there of the shattered chateau walls. Some of those demolished, some still standing. The building behind survives very well, the farmhouse, and in fact, while we were working at Hougoumont, we were privileged to be able to use that building, the ground floor and the attic of the building next to it, as our site office, which was brilliant. And again, a slightly blurred picture, but this shows you the remains of the North Gate, and around 1870. There are still some remnants of wooden gates up there. But all change in the modern era, and this is what the place looked like when we first visited as a team in 2015, which of course just happened to be the 200th anniversary of the battle. And we've got the gates, and they're just in the process here of hanging new gates from oak that have been made in Sussex in England and brought out. And it was quite nice. We had Coldstream Guards veterans with us, and they were the first people to close the gates. So they reenacted the famous event of 1815. There's the opposing gates on the other side of the courtyards, the south gate, which gave access to the area where the woods were. There is the chapel. You can't see the walls that hook onto it on the other side. The chateau, the building, the house was there. And there is the open ground. There's the south wall of the garden, the walled garden, and this is the open ground that I've been calling the killing ground, which was a key focus for some of our archaeology, which we'll get to in a later presentation. And we divided the area up as far as our work was concerned. So we've got the buildings and courtyard, we've got the formal garden, we've got the killing zone, killing ground, whatever you want to call it, the great orchard, the lost garden, which is what we're calling that big arboretum. But at the time of the battle, this area was just two open fields with rye and grass in it that the French advanced through. But next to it, in red here, we've got the woodland. That no longer exists, only those three trees still standing. The wood was cut down in the few years after the battle because the trees were so damaged by shot and shell. So the ground was cleared and turned into arable farm fields. And there is, top left, there is a view from the south looking up towards the farm. If you were a French soldier in 1815 and stood here, you'd be in the middle of the wood and obviously wouldn't see much of the farm in the distance. You can see the three big chestnut trees there, all cleared away. But it was an area that we have surveyed and excavated. And again, we'll come back to that. A view there, bottom right, of the inside of the walled garden. There is a small monument there to the French inside the garden, but you can see peering over the wall towards the left, the lion mound again, as I said, no escape. And this was a fancy garden at the time, but today it's pretty much just a flat grassed field. It's a paddock with not much to see. But again, we have investigated that. There are archaeologists, this would be 2015, so this would be the first year of the project. And this is ours out in the middle of the field that had been the woodland to the south, doing some small excavation trenches on geophysical anomalies. You can see there, there's a local news crew, a TV crew there, interviewing the team. And this gives you some idea of the amount of work we've done. This is just from 2015 and 2016, and these are excavation trenches. The one you were looking at there is right down at the bottom, just above the where it says 2015 trench 1. But you can see there along the inside of the killing ground, there are these big trenches which we've used to scrape off the soil and then metal detect within the trench. We've since then covered the entire area up to where it says trench 43. That's where the ground had been intact. It's all been quarried out. So there wasn't much survival within there. But you can see there is the courtyard. There's one of the great barns and the chapel. There's building work going on in this Google Earth photograph because the site was renovated. And we have to thank Project Hougoumont, which is a largely British charity, which in the years leading to 2015 renovated Hougoumont and have turned it into a visitor attraction. And it's now one of the key places to visit if you're going to the battlefield. There's a big museum up on the hill behind the Lion Mound, but Hougoumont is a key location. But as I said, even just as the gun smoke cleared in 1815, in the weeks following the battle, Britons were among those visiting the site as essentially tourists. But we'll come back to all of this detail. We've done excavation within the courtyard. There you see Phil of Time Team fame looking at his handiwork. It's a beautiful bit of excavation. Could almost be a bit of a Roman villa, but this is a stone drain that was under one of the barns that again was burnt down during the battle. There is the south gate. This is a very interesting drawing of the farm immediately after the battle. You can see dead bodies to the right, presumably French soldiers, been trying to storm the garden wall. They've been stripped naked. And then on the left, we have a burial party with all of the kit that's been taken off the dead soldiers. There's red tunics there, so presumably Allied troops among them. And these bodies are being unceremoniously dumped into a pit there. And I will again return in another talk to look at the issue of the burial of the dead. But you can see there the state of the building. It itself has been very badly injured by cannon shot and musket shot as the battle has progressed. So that really is Hougoumont. As I've said, it's been our headquarters on the battlefield since we started the project in 2015, and we've done a lot of work there, and it's told us a lot of stories. And so now I've introduced you to Hougoumont. What I'm going to do in the next presentation is start to look at the archaeology, at the field work we've done there. Okay, so I'll see you in the next presentation.